By morning, the storm had swallowed the world whole. Snow buried the fences up to the rails and sealed the barn doors shut. The cabin stood like a small wooden island in an endless white sea. Elias woke to the smell of firewood and broth. Clara had found a pot, scraped what she could from the pantry: dried beans, a strip of salted pork, a handful of cornmeal, and somehow made it taste like food. The baby slept in a basket by the hearth, wrapped in that same white feeding cloth. His tiny breaths, the only soft sound in the room. Elias sat at the table, eating in silence. Clara moved quietly behind him, mending torn blankets with quick, practiced hands. Each time the wind howled, she glanced toward the door as if expecting it to open. He noticed the bruises on her wrists again, the way she kept her sleeves tugged low. "You work like you've been here before," he said. She didn't look up. "I was raised on a farm once." "Where?" "Far from here." Her voice was calm, but final. He didn't ask more. The storm rattled the roof, drowning out the space between them. Hours bled into days. The world beyond the window stayed white and merciless. They survived one small routine at a time. Elias chopping wood, Clara drying clothes near the fire, feeding the baby when he cried. She hummed as she worked, little tunes with no words. Sometimes he'd catch her smiling at the child, whispering things Elias couldn't hear. Other times he'd see her staring into the fire, eyes glassy, lost somewhere miles away. At night, when the baby stirred, Clara would rise before Elias even moved, lifting the child, quieting his cries. Her humming would fill the dark, low, sweet, steady. It made the cabin feel almost human again. Elias pretended to sleep through it, but the sound worked its way into his chest, loosening something he'd buried when Martha died. One evening, while sharpening his knife by lantern light, he asked without looking up, "You run from someone?" Clara froze mid-stitch. "What makes you think that?" "The way you jump at every sound." The bruises, the silence, her hands lowered to her lap. "If I tell you," she said softly, "you'll wish you hadn't asked." He met her eyes for the first time all day. "I've already seen worse." But she only shook her head, returning to the thread and needle. "No," she whispered. "You haven't." The conversation ended there. The wind moaned through the rafters, and Elias felt the weight of every word she hadn't said. That night, the storm began to break. The wind fell away, leaving a strange hush in its wake. For the first time in days, Elias stepped outside. The moon hung pale above the drifts, casting a faint glow over the ranch. His boots sank deep into the crusted snow. He could hear the creek somewhere far below, ice cracking in the distance. The air smelled of pine and smoke. Too peaceful. Clara joined him at the doorway, holding the baby close beneath a blanket. "It's so quiet," she said. "Storm's over," Elias answered. "We'll ride to town when the sun's up." But she didn't look relieved. Her eyes searched the horizon, then she froze. "There," she whispered. Elias followed her gaze. Far off, along the ridge beyond the creek, a light moved slowly through the trees. A single lantern swaying in the dark. It bobbed once, vanished behind a rise, then reappeared. Elias's stomach tightened. No neighbor lived that close. No traveler would ride through snow this deep, unless they had a reason. He reached for the rifle leaning against the doorframe. "Someone's looking," Clara said again, voice thin as breath. "For who?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her grip on the baby tightened, eyes wide and glassy. Elias stepped out onto the porch, snow creaking beneath his boots. The light on the ridge flickered once more, then went dark. The night swallowed it whole. Inside, Clara rocked the baby, whispering words Elias couldn't hear. He stood watch until the moon sank low, the rifle heavy in his hands. When dawn came, the light didn't return. But her silence told him all he needed to know. Someone out there was searching, and they'd already found the trail. The storm passed, but the snow didn't melt. It stayed piled in gray ridges, hard as rock, sealing the ranch off from the world. Days slipped into weeks. Inside that cabin, something fragile began to take root. Clara moved through each day with quiet purpose, tending the fire, washing clothes, stirring broth that barely tasted of anything but kept them alive. Elias repaired the fences and checked the traps when the weather allowed, always careful to keep distance between them. But distance meant nothing when the baby cried. Clara would rise without hesitation, lift the boy from his cradle, and hum to him in that strange low voice of hers, songs Elias didn't recognize. The melody seemed older than words, filled with ache and comfort at once. Elias would watch from his chair, pretending to whittle or clean his rifle, pretending he didn't see how gently her fingers brushed the baby's hair, how the firelight softened her face. She used Martha's old white feeding cloth every time, folding it with care, the lace edges worn now but still clean. Seeing it in her hands was like being struck. That piece of cloth had been the last thing Martha touched before dying. The last memory of her voice whispering, "Keep him warm." Eli. Now Clara wrapped their child in it as if it belonged to her. Something inside Elias broke. He shoved his chair back, the legs scraping hard against the floor, and strode out into the cold. The barn smelled of hay and iron. He gripped the post by the stall, breathing hard, anger burning through the grief. He wasn't angry at her. Not really, just at the world, for taking one woman and sending another to fill the empty space before he'd had a chance to mourn. The door creaked behind him. Soft footsteps. Clara's voice came quiet, careful. "You think I'm replacing her?" He didn't turn. "You're feeding my son with her cloth." "What do you think it looks like?" Silence. Only the sound of the horses shifting in their stalls. Then, "I'm not trying to take her place, Elias. I'm just keeping a promise to a woman I never knew." Her words made him turn. She stood in the doorway, her face pale against the dark, her arms wrapped tight around herself. "You think I don't see the way you look at me? I don't belong here." "Maybe I don't, but that child does. He belongs to the world now, not to death." Elias's throat tightened. He had no answer. The truth hurt too much to speak. Clara left him there among the horses. The lantern swayed above him, its light carving shadows across the walls. He stayed until the flame guttered low, then went back inside. The baby's crying met him at the door, louder, weaker, wrong. Clara knelt beside the cradle, panic in her eyes. "He's burning up!" Elias rushed to her side. The baby's skin was hot to the touch, his tiny body trembling. "Get snow," she said. "Quick!" He bolted outside, scooped handfuls from the drift, packed it into a basin. She tore strips of cloth, soaked them, pressed them to the child's forehead. Hours passed in fragments, Clara whispering prayers under her breath. Elias pacing the floor, fetching water, tending the fire, cooling the rags. The baby's breathing came shallow, then stopped altogether for a terrifying moment. Elias froze. No, not now." Clara held the child tight to her chest, rocking, murmuring, her own tears falling onto his face. "Come on, little one. Come on, please." Then a faint cry. Weak, but there. Elias exhaled like a man surfacing from underwater. They worked through the night, neither speaking, just listening to the small, stubborn sound of life. When dawn bled through the frost-rimmed windows, the fever broke. The baby slept, his chest rising steady and sure. Elias sat beside the cradle, shaking, exhausted. He reached for Clara's hand without thinking. It was cold and raw from wiping sweat and tears. "You saved him," he said. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was distant, fixed somewhere beyond the walls of the cabin. "No," she whispered. "Not yet," Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Her eyes met his then, haunted, knowing. "You don't know who might take him from you." The words hung heavy, like the echo of a threat not yet spoken. Outside, the wind had gone still. The ranch was silent, but somewhere out there, far beyond the white hills, something, or someone, was already moving. The storm had passed. The world outside was washed in silver light. Snow glittered like crushed glass under the morning sun. The cabin looked smaller somehow, framed by long shadows stretching across the frozen drifts. Elias moved with purpose, saddling his horse in the yard. The reins were stiff from frost, the leather creaking as he tightened the cinch. He rubbed his palms raw on the rough hide. Supplies wouldn't fetch themselves, and the baby needed food beyond the dried beans they'd been stretching for days. Clara appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a thick shawl. The baby nestled against her chest in the familiar white feeding cloth. Her eyes followed his every move, anxious. "You're not going," she said. "I have to," he replied. His voice was flat, low, carrying the weight of a man used to obeying duty over fear. "They might be waiting," she insisted, her tone trembling. "People who want me back. You don't know what they'll do." Elias stopped, glancing over his shoulder. The sun glinted off his rifle, lying across the saddle. "Then tell me," he said. "Tell me what's happening." "I can't protect you if I don't know the danger." Clara hesitated. Her lips pressed together, eyes flicking to the child. Finally, she drew a deep, shuddering breath. "I escaped," she said. "From a fort, not far from here. After my husband died, I was forced into servitude. The captain's men, they used me. I had nowhere else to turn. When I ran, they swore they'd drag me back. Swore they'd make me pay." Elias's jaw tightened. Fury bubbled in his chest. Old soldier's fury he thought he had buried. Memories of blood and unfairness rose unbidden. The way men took what wasn't theirs. The helpless cries of the innocent. "Then they'll face me first," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Try to take you, and they'll learn what happens to men who cross me." Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained wary. She gripped the baby tighter. "Don't let the world find us," she whispered, barely audible over the creaking of the cabin walls. He nodded, saddling the last pack of supplies. His fingers brushed against the worn white feeding cloth, still folded neatly in the basket. A symbol of life, of care, of fragile trust. Elias swung into the saddle, boots crunching against the crusted snow. The horse shifted beneath him, snorting and pawing at the ice. He paused at the doorway, glancing back at the small cabin where 2 lives had intertwined in the span of weeks. Clara pressed her cheek against the window frame, watching him. The baby stirred, small fingers curling against the cloth. "Be careful," she whispered, voice tight with both fear and hope. "I'll be back before night," Elias replied, though the uncertainty of frontier roads hung between them. Clara's lips pressed a soft kiss to the baby's temple. "Stay close," she murmured, voice trembling. "The world is not kind. Not to those like us." He swung his leg over, gripping the reins, and urged the horse forward. Snow squeaked under the hooves, and the sun glinted off the frozen landscape. Every shadow, every ridge seemed to whisper of unseen eyes, of danger waiting just beyond sight. Still, Elias rode on, a man carrying more than provisions, carrying a promise, a silent oath to protect both woman and child. The wind bit at his face, the horse's breath steaming in clouds. But he felt the storm inside him settle slightly, replaced with purpose. Behind him, Clara watched until the cabin was no more than a shadow against the snowy horizon. The baby, now dozing, stirred beneath the white feeding cloth, warm and alive. She whispered again, a prayer or a plea, it was impossible to tell. "Don't let the world find us," she repeated. Elias tightened his grip on the reins. The world would try, but he would face it head-on. The town was quiet in the late morning, but whispers carried farther than footsteps. Elias dismounted outside the general store, boots crunching on frozen mud. The snow had hardened overnight, leaving a slippery crust over the road. His horse pawed at the ground, impatient. Inside, the post office clerk eyed him warily. "You're Elias Boone?" "I am," he said, voice low. "People say you're harboring a runaway," the clerk said, glancing at a faded wanted poster pinned to the board. "A woman. Fugitive. Trouble." Elias shrugged, keeping his hands where the clerk could see them. "I don't know any woman." "Never seen her?" The clerk frowned, scribbling something on a ledger. "Just so you know, the bounty's posted. Captain's men say she ran. Branded thief and deserter." He tapped the poster. Elias's eyes narrowed. The woman in the poster had Clara's face. Sharp, tired eyes. Mud on her cheek. The words beneath read, "Thief, deserter, approach with caution." Elias ripped the paper down, crumpling it in his fist until it was a tight ball of anger. He tucked it under his coat and stormed out, boots leaving deep prints in the snow. The ride back was silent, the reins tight in his hands, the horse's breath misting in the cold air. Every ridge and frozen creek seemed to hide eyes, every barn and fence post a potential threat. At the ranch, the wind whispered through the pines. He spotted her by the creek, sleeves rolled up, water swirling around her hands as she scrubbed the white feeding cloth. Elias's chest tightened. That cloth, the one Martha had used, the one now washed and softened in Clara's careful hands, was a symbol of life, of care, of the world that had almost slipped away. It also reminded him of the fear and shame she carried. Clara looked up. Her eyes caught the storm in his. She stiffened, ready for rejection, for the violence of his anger. Instead, Elias took a breath. "That cloth saved my boy," he said, voice steady, rough as gravel. "Nothing else matters." Clara blinked, disbelief mixing with relief. She set the cloth carefully on the bank, letting it drip, then folded her hands in her lap. Neither spoke. Night fell quickly, and they moved inside, boots crunching through the snow tracked into the cabin. Elias fed the fire, tossing in splintered logs. The flames leapt, throwing gold and red across the walls. The baby slept between them in the cradle, swaddled in the cloth she had just washed. He stirred only once, reaching tiny hands toward Clara. She bent, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. Elias watched her, silent, the weight of everything pressing against his chest. Grief, rage, guilt, and a strange relief. He still didn't trust fully, not yet, but the way she handled the child, the care in her hands, the quiet bravery, it was enough for now. Outside, the wind moaned through the valley. Then the sound of hoofbeats cut through the night. Elias tensed. His hand hovered over the rifle lying across the table. Clara stiffened, pulling the blanket tighter around the baby. "They're out there," she whispered. "Maybe," Elias said. His voice was calm, but his eyes scanned the horizon visible through the frost-covered window. Or maybe it's just the wind playing tricks. The baby yawned, stretching tiny fingers. For a moment, the world narrowed to this room, this fire, this fragile bubble of life. Clara leaned back against the wall, her head tilted toward the flames. The white feeding cloth lay between them, drying slowly, a quiet testament to survival, to hope, and to trust earned through shared hardship. Elias's gaze softened. "No matter who comes," he said, "we face it together." "That's all that matters." Clara's lips curved faintly. She reached for the baby, fingers brushing his cheek. They shared the silence, letting the firelight warm them. Outside, the valley stretched white and cold, shadows stretching long, but for once inside, there was no fear, only the fragile promise that life could still endure. Hoofbeats echoed again, distant yet deliberate. Elias tightened his hold on the rifle. Clara pulled the baby closer. The world was waiting, but so were they. The horizon burned red as the sun sank behind the ridge. Elias spotted movement before Clara did. 5 dark figures cutting through the snow, riding hard toward the cabin. His chest tightened. The horse's hooves thudded in rapid cadence, echoing off frozen walls. Clara's voice caught in her throat. "They found me," she whispered, pale, clutching the white feeding cloth to her chest. Elias's jaw hardened. "Down to the cellar, now." She hesitated, eyes wide with fear, before scooping up the baby and hurrying toward the trapdoor beneath the kitchen table. The child's soft whimper barely reached Elias as he slammed the door shut behind them. Outside, the soldiers halted in the snow, boots sinking into crusted drifts. The lead rider dismounted, tall, imposing, coat dusted with frost. He spat into the snow and straightened. "Step aside, Boone. She belongs to the military. She stole government property and ran. Hand her over." Elias planted his feet in the porch boards, rifle in hand. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the scent of smoke and pine. "No one's taking her," he said, voice low but resolute. The captain sneered, his eyes narrow and cruel. "You'd risk your neck for a whore?" Elias didn't flinch. He let the rifle rest loosely across his chest, tone calm but dangerous. "For a mother." The soldiers laughed, a hollow, cruel sound, and suddenly a gunshot shattered the silence. Glass from the cabin window splintered into the firelight. Sparks flew as the bullet punched through the wall, grazing the mantel. Smoke stung Elias's eyes. He ducked low, returning fire, his body pressed against the log wall. The cabin shuddered with each shot. Clara's muffled whimpers from the cellar stabbed through him like knives. He imagined the baby's tiny face, the life he had promised to protect. A second round tore through the doorframe. The cabin groaned. Splinters rained onto the floorboards. Elias felt the bullet before he realized it, burning through his shoulder, hot and sharp, dragging him to his knees. Pain exploded across his chest, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to drop the rifle. He moved with desperate precision, firing in short bursts, each shot aimed to drive them back. Smoke and dust choked the room. Fire caught the curtains, licking upward, filling the air with the acrid tang of burning cloth. One rider went down, horse stumbling into the snow. The others faltered, then began retreating, the captain cursing under his breath. Realizing Elias would not yield, finally, silence fell. The snow muffled the groans of men and horses alike. The cabin sagged in the aftermath, the fire flickering weakly against the blackened walls. Elias sank to the floor, breathing hard, blood soaking his shirt, sweat freezing on his skin. A small movement caught his eye. Clara emerged from the cellar, arms trembling as she pressed the white feeding cloth against his shoulder wound. Her tears fell onto the fabric, steaming slightly in the heat of the dying fire. "You saved me," she whispered, voice trembling. Elias's lips curved into a weak, uneven smile. Pain seared through his body, but for a moment, the world narrowed to her face, her hands, the tiny life cradled safely in her arms. "You saved me first," he said, voice hoarse. She dropped to her knees beside him, letting the baby stir against her chest. Elias felt the warmth of life, of love, of trust he hadn't thought possible. The smoke and splinters around them faded into the background, leaving only the two of them and the fragile beating heart of the child. Outside, hoofbeats faded into the distance, carried away by the valley's hush. The sun had dipped below the ridge entirely, leaving a pale twilight to cloak the snow. Elias tightened his hold on the rifle for a final precaution, but it was unnecessary. The danger had passed, for now. Clara pressed the cloth more firmly against his wound, murmuring, "Stay with me." "I will," he said, exhaling a shuddering breath. Pain and relief tangled together, sharp and sweet. "I'll always stay with you." The fire crackled softly, casting shadows across the walls of the battered cabin. Outside, the snow lay undisturbed again, the world temporarily at peace. Inside, two broken souls and one fragile child clung to life, bound by fear, love, and the unspoken promise of survival. The white feeding cloth lay between them, a symbol of hardship and hope, of life saved and trust earned. And for the first time since the winter began, Elias felt that perhaps they could endure whatever came next. The fire had consumed half the cabin before Elias could drive the soldiers away. Logs smoldered in twisted black shapes, smoke curling like ghosts through the broken rafters. The snow outside reflected the orange glow, turning the world into a battlefield frozen in white. By morning, the damage was clear. Half the roof sagged, walls charred, floorboards cracked. Elias rubbed his raw shoulder, still throbbing from the bullet, and surveyed the wreckage. Clara emerged from the cellar, carrying the white feeding cloth, still stained with soot. They didn't speak at first. The child slept, oblivious to the ruin around them. Elias handed her a hammer and a bundle of nails, and together they began to repair the cabin. Each plank raised, each shingle replaced, was a small act of defiance, against the cold, against violence, against despair. Clara's hands were raw and blistered, but her eyes shone with determination. She found a small bundle of the captain's insignia in her pack, the medals and pins that had marked her torment. Without a word, she trudged into the snow and buried them beneath a drift, marking the site with a lone pine branch. "The past," she whispered silently, stayed beneath the frost. Elias watched, respect and something warmer stirring in his chest. He taught her to hold the hammer right, to aim the nails straight, to feel the rhythm of work without letting fatigue rule her. Later, he led her outside. The wind had softened. Snow dusted the horizon. He placed a saddle on the horse he'd repaired, showing her how to mount, how to keep balance. Her hands trembled at first, but soon the motion became familiar, a dance of muscle memory. Then, rifles. He guided her through stance, grip, aim. She fired carefully, the bullet thudding into the distant snowbank. Elias nodded. "Good. You'll be ready if they ever come back." Silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The quiet had shifted. No longer mistrust, but peace. They moved as a unit now. Care, labor, survival. A rhythm forged through hardship, soot and fire. But the frontier held no memory for peace. Rumors traveled faster than snow, faster than the hoofbeats of men. One morning a mounted marshal arrived, warrant in hand, bearing Elias's name. Obstruction of law, harboring a fugitive. His eyes scanned the cabin, assessing danger. Clara's hand went to her mouth. "They'll take him," she whispered. "They'll take him for what I've done." Elias shook his head. "No, not if I can stop them," but she was resolute. "I'll turn myself in," she said quietly. tears threatening. "It's my fault." "It'll save him." He grabbed her wrist, firm and unyielding. "You're not running again," he said. His eyes locked on hers. "Not from me, not from the world, not from the baby," she faltered, caught in the force of his gaze. The baby coughed, a soft, tiny sound that split the still air. Both their hearts clenched. The child stirred, lifting a hand toward Clara's face, then toward Elias's. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Elias lowered himself to the floor beside the cradle, hand resting on the baby's chest. Clara knelt opposite him. The white feeding cloth was folded neatly beside the basket, clean once more, a symbol of survival and hope in a world of fire and snow. "You saved me," Elias whispered. "And you saved me," she replied. Their voices were soft but steady, carrying the weight of everything they had endured. Outside, the valley was quiet again, but the horizon hinted at movement. They didn't speak of fear. There was only preparation, only understanding. They would face it together, whatever the law, whatever men, whatever storms. The cabin, scarred but still standing, smelled of fire, wet wood, and the faint trace of the baby's breath. The rhythm of their hearts matched the rhythm of life inside those walls, and though the world would not wait for them, they had learned to wait for each other. Dawn broke pale and gray, frost stiffening the broken fence posts that had once marked the edge of the ranch. Snow lay deep and silent, undisturbed except for the hoofprints of approaching men. Elias crouched behind a splintered rail, rifle steady in his hands. Beside him, Clara clutched the baby, the white feeding cloth wrapped tight around him. "They're here," she whispered, eyes wide, lips trembling. "They'll have to come through me first," Elias said. His jaw was tight, breath steaming in the cold air. The wind carried the distant sound of hooves, echoing like a warning through the valley. Clara shook her head, voice fragile. "We should surrender. They'll kill us otherwise." Elias's gaze softened on her, and he reached for her hand. "You taught me what's worth fighting for," he said. "Not just surviving, but keeping life alive that's too precious to lose." The baby stirred, small fingers clutching the cloth. Elias pulled him closer for a moment, listening to the soft, innocent breathing. He set his jaw. There was no time for hesitation. The first shots rang out, shattering the quiet. Snow exploded as bullets struck frozen earth. The soldiers advanced, rifles raised, while Elias returned fire from behind the broken fence, the wooden splinters biting into his palms. Clara pressed the baby tighter against her chest. Her knuckles went white around the white feeding cloth. She peeked over the rail, heart hammering. She wanted to flee, wanted to surrender, but something in Elias's stance, in the way he leaned into the bullets unafraid, told her to stay. Another volley tore across the frozen field. Elias felt a sharp sting in his leg, then his shoulder. Pain lanced through him, but he ignored it, gripping the rifle harder, his eyes scanning for cover. Clara's heart leapt. "Elias!" she cried, but he only gave a tight nod. A bullet ripped through the rail above his head, splinters flying. Snow and smoke mingled in the cold air, a bitter scent of gunpowder burning the nose. The baby cried softly, startled, and Clara whispered, "Shh, it's okay." "You're safe," but Elias's voice cut through her fear. "Keep him safe, Clara. Don't let him see this." She lowered her body over him, shielding him as best she could, curling around both of them. Bullets tore through the wind, kicking snow in icy clouds. Each shot seemed closer, each shadow a threat. Elias's knees hit the frozen ground. Blood ran warm through his sleeve. He fell to one knee, rifle still raised. Pain seared his side, but he wouldn't give in. Clara's tears fell, freezing against her cheek. She pressed the baby close, the white feeding cloth a thin shield against bullets and wind alike. "Stay with me, Elias," she whispered, voice shaking, time blurred. Snow whipped across their faces. Rifle reports echoed, and the field seemed endless. But Elias's determination held, rooted in love, in protection, in the life he had sworn to preserve. Then, as suddenly as the chaos began, the shots stopped. Silence spread across the frozen valley like a thick, heavy blanket. The wind carried only the low whine of exhausted horses. A single figure approached through the gray morning light. The marshal, rifle lowered, eyes assessing the destruction, took in the broken fence, the scorched earth, and the small cabin still smoldering in the distance. "She's paid enough," he said, voice cold but measured. He nudged his horse forward, turning away. The soldiers behind him followed without question, leaving the ranch empty, silent, but scarred. Elias sagged forward, body trembling from pain and exhaustion. Clara rushed to him, her arms wrapping around him, the baby pressed between them under the white feeding cloth. She held him close, tears streaming, whispering into his ear. "I thought I'd lost you," she sobbed. Elias shook weakly, blood streaking his face, yet a smile broke through. "You saved me," he murmured. "You saved us all." The baby yawned, tiny fingers reaching for both of them, unaware of the violence that had almost claimed him. Clara brushed a lock of hair from his face, leaning into Elias's warmth. For a long moment, the three of them remained there, huddled together, hearts racing, tears mingling with snowflakes and smoke. Outside, the valley was quiet, broken only by the distant cries of birds awakening to a new day. Elias pressed a hand to the white feeding cloth, feeling the warmth of life, of survival. The symbol that had carried them through hunger, fire, and fear now lay between them, a talisman of hope. "Together," Elias whispered. "Yes," Clara said. "Always together." The sun climbed slowly above the ridge, casting gold across the snow. The ranch, battered but unbowed, stood as a testament to endurance, to love, and to the bond between two people who had survived the impossible. And for the first time since the winter began, the Boone Ranch felt like home again. Spring came slowly to the Boone Ranch, tentative at first, then unstoppable. Snow melted in drifts, revealing brown earth softening under the sun's warmth. Crocuses and tiny shoots pushed through, braving the chill. The valley smelled of wet pine and damp soil, of life returning after the harshest winter anyone could remember. Elias sat on the worn porch steps, the baby in his arms, small fingers reaching blindly for the world. The boy gurgled softly, eyes bright, and the first faint laughter of infancy rippled through the air. Clara moved beside them carrying a basket of seeds. She paused, her gaze falling on the white feeding cloth, now frayed at the edges but clean and fragrant, hanging from the porch post. It fluttered gently in the breeze, pale against the deep green of newly sprouted grass. Elias glanced at it, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his lips. That cloth had been more than fabric. It had been survival, care, and trust. Once tainted by fear and tragedy, now it danced lightly in sunlight, a banner of life reclaimed. Clara knelt to the ground, hands in the earth, planting seedlings with a careful rhythm. Elias adjusted the baby on his lap, letting the boy's tiny hands brush against her outstretched fingers. Their eyes met briefly, unspoken words passing. The past remained, but they did not speak its horrors aloud. Only the quiet work of rebuilding mattered. Time moved with the lazy certainty of spring. Elias mended fences, repaired barns, and dug trenches for new plantings. Clara hauled water, tended the garden, and watched the baby grow stronger each day. The air was filled with the soft music of life, wind rustling through pines, the occasional crow calling from a distant ridge, the gurgle of their son learning to babble. Evenings came early. The sun dipped low, casting long gold ribbons across the land. Clara hung the white feeding cloth from the porch post once more, letting it catch the last light. It seemed almost alive, glowing in the sunset. Milk, loss, and rebirth, it bore all three now, a symbol of their journey, of what they had endured, and what they had preserved. Elias rocked the baby gently, feeling the warmth of flesh and life against his chest. He whispered soft nonsense words, a promise of protection, of steadfast presence. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, tired but unbroken, fingers brushing the boy's hair. The ranch was quiet, but not empty. They worked side by side in silence, each small act a testament to endurance, planting seeds, stacking wood, patching roofs. They did not need to speak of the winter, of fire, bullets, or loss. It was etched into their muscles, their hearts, their shared glances. Only the life they held now mattered. As the sun sank behind the hills, the white cloth glimmered like a banner of peace over the homestead. It swayed slowly in the wind, a quiet reminder of what had been lost and what had been won. Then, a sharp knock at the door broke the stillness. The baby stirred, looking between them. Elias's hand instinctively went to the rifle, but his gaze met Clara's. Fear flashed in her eyes, mirrored in his. But then recognition settled in. a shared understanding of strength, of unity, of the battles they had already endured. Elias set the baby down in Clara's arms, and they rose together, shoulders squared, eyes steady. The porch creaked under their weight as they stepped toward the door. Outside, the world waited, unpredictable and untamed. But inside, the Boone Ranch stood resilient, a testament to life reclaimed from winter's cruelty. The white feeding cloth fluttered in the breeze one last time, pale, frayed, and radiant, catching the final rays of the sun. Milk, loss, rebirth, and hope, all bound in a single piece of cloth, witnessing the quiet peace of the homestead that had survived against all odds. Elias opened the door. They met whoever waited with calm resolve. The valley beyond glowed golden, endless, and full of possibility.